My name is Susan. I'm with the IAB out of New York. I've led the game committee for the past 5 years and the Mobile Center of Excellence. Today we're going to talk about understanding emerging ad formats. I'm also the person who will be taking any questions on Slido, so please ask away while we're talking. I'll look down. I'll try to integrate them into the conversation where it makes sense, and if we don't get to your questions, we'll be out in the hallway to answer any other questions that you have. So without further ado, why don't we each introduce yourself? What do you do at your companies?
Hi, my name is Sam Fischer, and I'm Director of Advertising Solutions at InMobi.
Hi, I'm Jacilyn, and I'm a Senior Manager at Zynga.
Jonathan Stringfield. I oversee global business marketing, measurement, and insights for Activision Blizzard Media, which is the advertising arm of Activision Blizzard.
Hi, I'm Hajian, and I am a UA lead at Kabam.
Great. Well, today we're going to be talking about new approaches to game advertising. What's new, what's different, and importantly, why. So let's start with the fun stuff. When you think about impactful ad experiences, whether that is for user acquisition of your own game or when you're working with brands on advertising within your game, if you could pick just one, what would be the most exciting and impactful thing that you're seeing in your world? And let's go down the row again.
So I think what's really interesting around emerging ad formats is the premise behind what we're trying to achieve with them is share of attention and share of experiences. And when you think about what that means is that in a world now with such limited capacity in terms of users' mindsets and time, what you're really trying to drive is to just get someone's attention for a period of time and have an experience, whether it be from a user acquisition standpoint, but also a branding standpoint. And I think a really good example from what we've seen around from our side, on the brand side specifically, is a 360 panoramic experience, and that was with Tourism New Zealand. But why that's interesting is that their business challenge for the US is actually getting people to come across to New Zealand, and there's a couple barriers with that. One of them is around the time to get there. It's quite far away. The other thing is actually the cost of getting there. The time off in the US is actually a bit more limiting than other countries. So there's a barrier to the US consumer actually getting across to that side of the world. And so what we needed to do from an interactive experience was actually bring New Zealand to them. So if you've ever been there, it's a gorgeous country. And then what was done was actually different video assets were produced and actually done in a 360 video format that actually gave the consumer a real life experience about how to get there and what it was like, and really give them that feeling. So when you think about that around share of attention, around share of experiences, that kind of breaks up and gets the consumer to thinking, maybe I do want to go there. How could I get there? So I think that's what we're trying to do around emerging ad formats.
So Jacilyn, at Zynga, what's the most exciting?
Currently at Zynga, I think if I had to pick one, it would be playables. It's one of the newest ad formats, which I think it's excelling for us when in terms of conversion metrics. And we started adding this in our rotation for a creative refresh. Starting around Q3 or sometime in Q4 last year, and from what we have launched, we're seeing about a 50 to 60% lift in CTR. This is really huge for us, right? Something that is very, very exciting because now we're getting away from the static images, and then we got the videos, which is really giving them, the static images just gives us like a snapshot of like what a gameplay will look like, what the game would look like. And here comes the video, which is an ad format that shows you what the game is all about. But a playable will actually allow you or allow us to use a medium to allow our users to actually interact with the gameplay. And this is really big because this will push for a higher engagement. It is something that is very important to us, especially now that there's a clutter in the market right now of different games, different ad formats, different themes of that works for them, right? So it's something that anything that will increase the engagement of the users is definitely what we want to push for. And again, this is a new ad format. A lot of things that we want to test, theories that we wanted to test. But from what I learned so far is that the continuity and the smoothness of that playable giving that wonderful experience, a journey, what you call, right? From start to finish until you give them that compelling reason for them to hit that click button to download in the end. That is key. And so if I had to break it down, it's definitely that start, body, and the ending of it, right? It starts with a lead-in video. A lead-in video needs to be something that will really catch their attention, something that is broadly connected to the actual playable. We want that because the lead-in video is actually a good preview of what we want the users, or what we expect the users to be doing while they're interacting with the actual playable. This will give us a good example of like a clear-cut instructions of what we want them to do. Like, for example, for Words and Friends, if we want them to move those letters onto the board game, a dynamic hint would be a great way to show them of what to do, like a moving hand, placing that letter onto the game board, or maybe an arrow moving one from the cow for Farmville. I don't know if you guys play that game before. Moving from one cow from one area of the board game to the other, things like that. We don't want to create any confusion. We want to make sure that the experience is very smooth. The next part of it will be your gameplay, right? You want to ask yourself, what is it about our game is the best experience that we can give our players? This is one thing that you need to ask yourself, because your ad, this playable will be the first look that the users will be getting. And so you want to put your best foot forward. You want them to be entertained, interested, just so that they can download the game. And in the end, we want to be able to give them that moment, that congratulatory moment. Like, for example, if we're talking about a poker game, you went all in, you win, let's give them a celebration. Let's give them the confettis and the sparkles, all that, the big moment that will make them feel that, hey, I'm awesome, right? And so let's go download the game. Sometimes incentives do really well for us. Like, for example, if you download the game now, it'll be even more compelling for them if you get them free gems or free coins just to get them to download. Currently at Zynga, we are able to, the playable spend makes up about 15-20%, and I really would like to see that grow even further in the future.
That's great. So we've talked about from MODERATOR, rich media experiences. You've got Zynga with playables. How about you, Jonathan, over at Activision Blizzard Media?
Yeah, so where we're spending a lot of time right now is opt-in value exchange media, which isn't a new format per se, but I think the intentionality that we're going about is a little bit different. So when we're building ad experiences, we're kind of beholden to three masters, right? So on the one hand, advertisers, quite obviously, they want efficacious media. They want some mechanism through which their message can punch through with consumers, i.e. our players. Second is to the player. I mean, we're first and foremost a game company, straight up. So, advertising will always be a tertiary mechanism to that. So the extent to which that we can make that experience, whether it be an ad or what have you, well integrated in the game, and if possible, beneficial to the game, that's exactly what we're going to do. And then third, the studios. Like, we are beholden to them in terms of taking something like advertising, like marketing experiences, and putting it within their games that sometimes have been around for upwards of decades. So the standard that we have to keep is respecting these franchises, this fan base that's highly invested in the games and candidly has a lot of love for them, and making sure that it's still conducive to a good experience across all three. And what we found is that if done right, if you really kind of have something like the reward mechanism and the extent to which that's built into the game, and make sure that it's up to the standards of the studio, quite candidly, it pays dividends for everyone. That, again, I think at this point in the advertising world, we're kind of coming to a reckoning in terms of the extent to which people are recognizing what they are paying for their entertainment experiences, whether it's implicit or explicit, right? So whether or not you are giving personal information, whether or not, you are in some way transacting with a company, even if you don't understand it, you're paying for those experiences. Being upfront about it, right? Saying, listen, can we have a little bit of your time? we have this brand that wants to show you something, and giving someone a reward for it, they feel respected. They feel their time has been respected, and therefore they're paying attention. If they're paying attention, you get punched through for advertisers. So overall, what we've seen is that this has been effective in terms of making sure that we're kind of keeping that balance, and that's the framework and the ethos that we really want to develop when, whether or not it's a reward format or otherwise, we have to think about how else can we integrate marketing experiences beyond our mobile games, like on the PC titles, on the console titles, where candidly, the audiences are a little bit pricklier about us intruding on their experiences. So, being able to do it right in a way that's respectful for our players will always be paramount, and that's why we've made a heavy investment in that format.
Great. Roz, how about the world in Kabam? What's hot for you all?
Right. So piggybacking off of what Jossie said, playables are easily the most engaging ad format you could ask for. But our game that we're working on over at Kabam is called Marvel Contest of Champions. It's a AAA game, and it has beautiful graphics. And that can mean that creating a true playable with a tolerable file size that can be distributed can be really challenging. So what we've been doing is doing interactive end cards. So we've been using an interactive end card created by our partners at Vungle, the Rewarded Video Ad Network. And they have created one for us that is basically a light demo of our game, and it's preceded by a gameplay-focused video. So having that flow where you're showing the users of what's to come and giving them a little taste of how to play the game, it really allows for a native experience, and it allows for them to get a really good picture of what they're getting into before download.
That's great. So you've got all these different formats, playables and opt-in value exchange, AKA rewarded. They're not necessarily, as you said, Jonathan, they're not new per se, but they seem to be having this new life and new way of looking at it. What is the similarities between these ad products, including end cards, which I think Roz, you had talked about when we were in our prep class. What is making these rise to the top as some of the most exciting, engaging, compelling ad formats?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that question is really important because across the board, where I see the similarities is we're all essentially asking the consumer and teasing the consumer with a piece of value. Whereas before, from a push marketing standpoint, it's just see a message, see a message, see a message. Now we're asking them, because of the kind of technology-driven world and the type of audiences and their day-to-day lives, we're actually having to give a little bit more give a little bit more value to them in terms of experiences. And I think where it's really interesting is from a central strategy standpoint. So I think when people or marketers are thinking about, do I just want to try a format for the sake of trying a format? I think testing a test and learn approach to many things is actually a great mindset, and that's what we're asking. Evolve your own mindset about testing and learning. But I do think it's really important to have your strategy and have the formats fit into that strategy. Otherwise, just testing a format for the sake of testing it, I don't think you're going to see the real value you're after.
Yeah, so Jonathan, you're our researcher in the group. When you think of it from a research and performance perspective, why are these working, and how do you all know that these things are in fact working? How are you measuring them?
Oh, well, that's a very long conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so we. The reason that I'm here at AB, candidly, is that we put a heavy investment in the whether or not these ads are actually resonating with folks, right? So, and again, we've gone to various lengths in terms of like the sundry survey testing and things like that. We've done the biometric and neurological labs, like the whole 9 yards. Like what we're really trying to find out is that when are people engaged and when are they not, right? So what are the triggers to which people are actually going to be paying attention or not? Because again, this will resonate towards things that are going to be the scorecards for the advertisers, whether that's surveys, whether that's foot traffic studies, whether that's MMM or anything of that nature. You need to make sure that the message is resonating. If not, there's no point, right? Like you can throw as much media out there as you want, but if people aren't paying attention and or actually grokking what the message is, there's no value in what you're doing. And what we found is, and again, why we're leaning into things like value exchange media, is that what can be successfully integrated within the gameplay experience, right? So what are the things that feel native? What are the things that are like, this seems like it's okay relative to my expectation when I open up a game, right? So we do a lot of advertising, like where a lot of our opening up advertising opportunities is Candy Crush. Candy Crush has been around for the better part of a decade, right? Like many of you have played it. If you open up, you have an expectation for how that's going to look, how it's going to feel, what's going to happen, the mechanics of it. And that's what makes franchises successful, right? Like we could get very sociological or economic about, like, it's McDonald's, right? Like, you always know what you're getting into when you go to these things. But specifically for the game experience, if all of a sudden I go in and I'm having like my me time, right? Like, I got 5 minutes, I'm gonna crush some candies, I'm gonna relax for a minute, I'm gonna play a game, and you're putting something there that I don't expect, or it's weird, or it's orthogonal to my understanding of it, it's jarring. And when it's jarring cognitively, I'm out of sync with what I would otherwise be, which is relaxed, attentive, etc. So I think the real trick with so many of these is that it has to be ingrained into that gameplay experience, and it has to meld with what people's expectations are. And then again, the straightforward aspect of things like value exchange, we're just respecting their time transparently, right? Like, just saying that, again, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, right? Like, maybe you don't want to see an ad. That's cool. I don't want you to see it if you're not going to pay attention. Because again, what we want to sell on is the capability these ads are effective. So if you're willing to, and you feel like the value you're getting out of that is sufficient, then look at the ad, right? And in which case, everyone, again, gets something good out of it.
Roz, I know Kabam has a focus on multiplayer games. So when you think of these type of emerging ad formats related to multiplayer games, how does this fit in? How are you evaluating effectiveness?
Yeah, so the effectiveness of our emerging ad formats, we're A/B testing them against our regular videos, and we're seeing a lift in user quality and retention based on that specifically. So that alone is enough evidence for us that we should be moving into these emerging ad formats. And earlier today, I was watching the Facebook panel, and I heard something that really resonated with me. And that is that big, giant platforms like Facebook and Google, they are moving towards automating all of their optimization, like machine learning, AI, all of the buzzwords that we're all familiar with. But as that continues to happen, the impetus for the creative to perform is going to be that much more important. So performance is really going to come from creatives, and having ad formats that are engaging is going to be utmost important going forward.
And Jacilyn, you've talked about the playables being a very efficient ad unit. What does that mean?
If I pick one KPI, a conversion KPI that I do really look at when in terms of engagement, it would be click-through rates. And this is what we use as a basis of how, when we do A/B testing on our creatives. As you can see, when we create those campaigns, there's layers and layers and layers of targeting, different optimizations that we've been using. And so we want to make sure that we peel off all those layers and be able to really crack what is performing for each and different targetings that we have. For example, if your core, what works for one genre works for a different genre. There's no clear-cut answer as to what type of playable works for which genre, right? So you really need to start testing which lead-in video will perform better for this type of genre, for this type of targeting, for this lookalikes or interest groups that you're using. They really do behave differently. The length of the actual playable, should we be putting in more rounds? Should we be doing 1 race, 2 race, or all those components together, right? We need to make sure that we really nail those components down.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
She was the culprit.
we want to hear what you have to say. There we go. That's going to help with that. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Where was I? I was in the length of the videos, right? You don't want it too short. You're not really giving them the experience that you're hoping them to get. You don't want it to be too long, that it be too boring, that you'll just have them drop off before your playable ends. And so those are the things that we're trying to test and see whether or not we can get any lifts.
So do you think that these new engaging ad formats are actually helping brands move over finally to game advertising? We all know what the obstacles are. We've all talked about it ad nauseum, but if we leapfrog into the positive, are you hearing more positives about this type of advertising in games? And maybe what questions are you still getting from brands?
I mean, I'll jump off and say that, gaming is still a loaded term, right? So, no matter what, we're still getting, sometimes surprising reactions, right? So, we'll get the reaction, oh, gaming, that's like 6-year-old kids in their basements, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, one, no. Like all those people are getting older. Like, yesterday's players of like Super Mario Brothers are today's stockbrokers, right? Secondary, like again, like we're at a mobile summit. Like lots of people have mobile phones, presumably, right? And then almost all of you have a game on it. Congratulations, you're a gamer, right? So like what we mean by merit of the title of gamer, I think like one, there's a little bit of a perception issue in terms of who does that actually include, and realistically, it's damn near everyone. And then therein, I think there's a bit of fear, I think still probably relegated to the more kind of quote-unquote hardcore gamers that they've seen brands go into there, and it's gone sideways, and generally, like, again, on the more hardcore side, gamers aren't really cool with if they paid $60 for a game, why am I getting an ad, et cetera, like it can go bad for you, but again, that's one of those areas where you need to understand your audience, and you need to understand in terms of like what value, again, to harp on this issue, that they will be getting out of it. Otherwise, it will fall flat. And again, it's a cynical audience in that regard, but it's not impossible, again, particularly with the mobile audiences, which are much more broad in terms of the overall swath of gamers. So I think those are the biggest issues, but like getting around those, you're looking at environments that are largely brand safe, assuming that you're in the right titles. Again, like I always tell folks, Candy Crush is chocolate rivers and unicorns and rainbows. Like there's not anything too offensive there, unless those things kind of rub you the wrong way for whatever reason. People are going to view the ads, particularly if there is some incentivization tied to it. But then they're effective, right? And again, I think the biggest issue that I tend to find is a disconnect with advertisers, with brands in particular, is that they keep forgetting that we should care that these brands have an outcome in the real world, and we should be able to attribute that. And it's not always easy. In fact, it's quite tricky, but that should always be the North Star. Like, are any of these advertisements actually doing something meaningful for the business you're trying to advertise? And for the most part, again, if done yes, the answer is yes. And it's just a matter of making sure that you're tying the execution and the measurement to it correctly. Otherwise, again, you're doing a format, you're doing a game, you're doing a quote-unquote gaming strategy for the sake of it, and that's not doing anyone any favors.
Does anyone want to elaborate on that? No? If not, one thing I hear you talking about, and things that I've heard at Mobile Growth Summit, and you've all probably heard throughout the sessions you've attended here today, is just this need to put the consumer first for a whole host of reasons. So let's start with privacy and GDPR and California Consumer Privacy Act. Where does that come into play in these game formats? Raj, you want to start with, let's say, the whole notion of opt-in, the opt-in part of opt-in value exchange.
Yeah, so speaking specifically to GDPR, I know that we as gaming advertisers, we're all going through it right now. But I think it's really important as advertising becomes more widespread, and specifically digital advertising, that something like GDPR is in place so that people know that they have the right to opt out. And knowing that I'm not going to take your data and do something with it that you're not aware of. I think it's really important for everyone to understand that. And entering this industry and learning about that myself has been a wild ride. But as a consumer, I think it's really helped me as well.
So you mentioned brand safety. Where does brand safety fit in this consumer equation? It seems so obvious to put the consumer first, but in things like brand safety, in terms of how you're developing your brands, the type of advertising you're planning to bake into these games, where does brand safety fit?
I mean, I think it fits from the very start. I think it's about understanding and having a mindset of transparency to the consumer, as we've talked about a number of times. I think it's also around the responsibility on advertisers over the last 12, 18 months to really come to the table around sharing what to the consumer, which hasn't really been done probably as best it should for quite some time. And I think also with the negativity around PR, you see it on the news, I think consumers have gotten a little bit wary of it, and it's actually quite refreshing to have some of these pieces now come into play to show that advertising, it does have a role. And then also that we are being open and transparent now about you, the consumer, and giving you that power.
So Jacilyn, for playables, when we were talking, you were mentioning sort of file size loads, which caused a lot of issues in delivery. We know the number one reason for ad blocking is ads that don't load quickly, burdening your battery life. When you think about playables on Zynga, how do you ensure that the ad load is appropriate for a phone?
We want to make sure, we do test them to make sure that the whole journey, the whole experience is very safe because we don't want to see them dropping off. And so we do a lot of testing when it comes to when you load the campaigns, when you load those playables up, making sure that the tech issues have already been debugged on our side. Also, I wanted to add that the changing, it seems like with the GDPR, I just wanted to add that because of that change, I've noticed that the type of products that Facebook or Google is coming out now, they're trying to target more broader audiences. And so that makes us even more want to test into trying to broaden that funnel. Instead of targeting that core audience that we have, we want to make sure that, hey, this is not just the audience that we need to target now, it's a larger audience. And so we start testing those things.
Is that more about audience targeting versus contextual targeting, do you think?
Audience.
So just broader audience.
Broader audience.
I think it's just, to that point, just being smart about it, right? Like, I think we got very enamored with the idea of like, oh, so I have behavioral signals on people who are 34 years old that live in the Midwest that buy cookies 3 times a week. That like you could just hone that in right there. But you know, that's fine, and you know, we can talk about like what price are we paying to get that level of data, which is, you know, a very big and looming question for many of the bigger platforms. You know, we can talk about like, you know, how effective or like how much we want to be concerned about wastage. But from a pure practicality standpoint, like you want to talk to your best customers, but you also want to talk to your like not so good customers, right? You want to talk to the folks that might not just be like your number one consumer that you can flip over to it, right? So there's even just opportunity costs associated with that I think we got too focused and too enamored with the possibilities there to take a stand back and look at the practicality of trying to, again, flip more people, flip competitor brands over to you or what have you. And again, like I think GDPR and things like that are inevitably a little bit of a reckoning on that, but it's providing in many respects like a good healthy level set in terms of like, you know, how do we think through practices for something as fundamental as targeting, but one of the things that's very fundamental to any execution you're going to have.
So when you think of these engaging ad formats, maybe I'll go back to the end cards. You know, advertising can be used for upper funnel, brand awareness, but also once you start getting into the end card realm, you can be much more in the performance marketing, where you can actually get consumers to take action, take them off of the site, collect first-party data. Do you have anything to share about performance?
I mean, I think from a performance standpoint, making sure, you know, what you're asking the consumer to do in a very seamless consumer experience is paramount. So whether we've done, you know, playables, rich media units, interactive end cards, that call to action I think is super important, and I think that's what we've generally been testing and learning on our side from a creative optimization, and then giving that feedback to the client around. We've tested a number of different opportunities around where the consumer can engage in. This is what's actually popping. So that test and learn and that interactive end card experience is great, but the actual consumer experience and telling them exactly and managing their expectations to where they're going and what they're going to do has always provided the kind of best return on investment.
So where do you see as the next big wave? Is this just going to be an evolution of sort of more opt-in, respectful, light loading ads, or do you see new ad formats on the horizon? Can we learn from any other industries? Or do you think that other industries are actually learning from games and the effectiveness of what's happening within the game advertising world?
I mean, I'd love to think that they're learning from us, but I'm not convinced that's true.
Well, I mean, first, opt-in value exchange, we're seeing, you know, Pandora's using it, dating sites are using it. You're starting to see opt-in value exchange across in OTT, and especially effective with end cards there. So what started in game, is everyone, oh yeah, well, you know, you need a life, watch this video. You're getting uninterrupted ad experiences on Pandora and Spotify. So that's sort of what I was talking about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, so I think what it boils down to is I think it'll probably be a bridge too far that we ever ask anyone to like advertising. And like, we can kind of like lie to ourselves that like, oh, people always love ads. Like, not really, right? Like, it's always going to be like a bit of a tax no matter what. However, could we at least get to the watershed of like, are they okay with it, right? Do they understand why it's there? Do they recognize what they're getting out of it? And then you're kind of on the right path, right? Like, I think it's truly the case of, you know, we've been occasionally, I think in particular in the mobile world, like a little duplicative in terms of like how people would essentially be monetized by merit of advertising. So once we can kind of dispense with that and just be upfront with consumers, like, you know, people are generally rational. They do have like some degree of decision making. If you're actually being more forthright with them, again, they'll pay attention to a message. And that's one of the biggest pushbacks that we got for a long time on things like, you know, incentivized media was that, oh, well, people are just doing it for the reward and they don't care about my brand. Well, so it's like, okay, well, one, I have bad news about advertising in general for you because, like, you know, that's not generally how people think. But then two, like, no, there's more to it, right? They're not just flipping over the phone. There is a sense that they recognize that, okay, this brand is connected to something that I'm getting from this. Like, they're helping me at this point in this game that I'm invested in. And to a certain extent, like, that pays dividends when you're grateful for that opportunity and that, like, okay, I'll pay attention to the message. If you pay attention to the message, again, that's something that will register in terms of whether or not an advertising campaign or an advertising message was effective.
Great. We have a couple questions from the audience. Again, Slido.com. It's not directed at anyone in particular, so chime in. Let's start with this one. With the arrival of vertical video ads, why do mobile games played in native portrait orientation still make us rotate phones to view landscape video ads?
I can speak to that. Yeah, so the game that I mentioned earlier, Marvel Contest of Champions, it is played strictly in landscape. So that's definitely a challenge that we've faced in the past. But there are new innovative ways that you can exactly display what it's going to look like on your phone in a vertical format. And that's what we're working on developing more and more because obviously the vertical inventory is something that needs to be tapped into.
I mean, you're always going to be a little at mercy of like what the format for the game is, and it might just make sense for the mechanics or not. But like the real, you know, the answer here is that like we don't control what advertisements we get half the time, right? Like if it was shot in a certain way, that's what it is. So like again, something like Candy Crush is vertical, and we love vertical video, right? Like full screen looks beautiful, awesome, but not a lot of video is shot that way. So a whole lot of it's landscape. So you know, again, like I think it's here too probably going to be a bridge too far that we ask advertisers that, hey, always make sure that you're, you know, cutting your content in both dimensions, right? Or if you're going to advertise with, you know, Marvel versus, you know, Candy Crush or whatnot, make sure you have those different orientations ready. In practicality, that's not going to happen. However, I think it is important to keep in mind, like, where are you placing your bets in terms of that advertisement to make sure that you are maximizing for, you know, whatever orientation is, because the games probably won't change, though I think it's interesting to give people the opportunity to change it both ways. Like, that's often tied to the mechanics, which will be a little bit more cemented. So it's one of those little bit of a cart before the horse in terms of format.
Yeah, here's another one, and it's not to anyone, but I'll throw it to you, Jacilyn, because you talked about length earlier. But in terms of video ad length, what brands and mobile in terms of video ad length, are brands and mobile publishers embracing the 15-second, 6-second splash, etc. formats, or is the 30-second spot still king?
Specifically for playables?
Maybe not playables.
It's very different, right? Playables will need longer. It depends on the placement. The placement matters a whole lot. If you're on the stories, we want to be able to do that in 10 seconds or even 15 seconds max. If it's like a video, then maybe 15, 30 seconds is where you want to be. Playables a little bit longer than that because you're doing multiple runs depending on what genre it is. So it really depends on what genre, what game, and the kind of experience that you wanted to give them.
I think that's a great point. The experiences, I mean, from a playable standpoint, needs to be longer because you need to get the consumer, you know, involved in that. I think what we've seen on our side is 7 to 10 seconds from a, you know, performance standpoint on video is actually a best practice. Nothing over 15. Even from a brand standpoint, anything, you know, above 15, you're really starting to see a really high drop-off.
Yeah, I mean, generally it's about brands developing a truly mobile-first mindset, and that means vertical video people, you know, shorter lengths, and no one wants to watch your 30-second TV commercial that you develop for daytime TV, you know, anywhere.
And
you know, let alone games, you know.
I think that's a great point, and actually turn back to some things we've been talking about development. You know, the creative agency, in terms of their roles, a lot more maybe working with the media agency from a brand standpoint anyway, but I would like to see them actually come to the table a bit more around, either producing that TV spot, but then also having a much more mobile-first mindset. I think we've often seen sometimes that the assets given were produced in a high-end, a TV-first mindset, and moving them towards a mobile-first mindset would be ideal.
Yeah, great. Well, we have time for one more question here. There's one, and it's pointed to Jonathan. So, Jonathan, when trying to move app monetization techniques into PC on console gaming, what are the economics from a product sales versus advertising perspective?
Holy hell.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, no.
You need that one again?
On the one hand, there's a good question of is that the best place for it, right? So if you're talking about a phone app, but it's on a PC or console experience, does that make sense if I'm interpreting the question? Which I don't know, which is, I think a broader statement in terms of this needs to be well fit for the environment, right? And again, I don't know exactly how, I have an idea, but how things are going to look for, when we have advertisements, marketing experiences more integrated, more on the PC side versus the console side. I think we are heavily looking at it more towards a branding experience for a lot of ways. Yes, I think there's room for performance to be integrated there, but it has to be something that is accessible from those devices, which may or may not be an app, strictly speaking. So, and nor would I try to, sell that through to an advertiser as such. So, always thinking about and we think about this a lot when we're, not just thinking about the games, but also the advertising experiences therein. Who is that person? What are they doing at that time, right? So if you're playing a game on a mobile phone, it's your commute maybe, you're waiting in line, et cetera, quick hit, quick gratification, et cetera, et cetera. Playing a console game, you're sitting on the couch, you're at home, it's relaxation time, you're probably not working, et cetera, different mindset, different concepts in terms of what you're going to be receptive to. And again, it might not be something like an app install or what have you. So I guess my overall takeaway is don't try to force fit the goal to the experience, but just make sure that the goal and the experience are well aligned, and that's going to work out a lot better.
Well, that's great. I think you've given us a lot to think about in terms of engaging, future forward thinking, and I think we have a charge here to help the buy side adopt a mobile first advertising mentality in games and across the board. So thank you all, and thanks for attending.